being undertaken by the government to control this menace. So my presentation will basically highlight the research work that we've done, the capacity building initiatives also that we are putting in place, awareness creation as one key component of dealing with marine litter. We have an obligation as a country to report for SDG, especially 14.1.1 on floating litter. Then I'll highlight a few government interventions that have been put in place to control marine litter pollution. And then lastly, we are working on an initiative to monetize waste so that we don't look at waste as waste, but we look at things that are resources that can be used to improve community livelihoods. So there is starting with the research part. We've been doing some research work now for almost 3, 4, 5 years. And the main aim of our research work is to generate information that will identify marine litter hotspots that we can target for either source reduction or cleanup intervention initiatives. And my pictures are interesting. The one to the right, the green one, is a tire that we found at the bottom of the sea. It's thrown somewhere along our Kenyan coast. Then the objectives of our research work have been 3. One is to characterize and quantify the amount of litter and the types of litter that we get along the Kenyan coast. 2 is to try and track and monitor plastic litter movement from the source to the sea. So basically looking at the rivers, one of the rivers that we've looked at is originating from Nairobi and discharging in the ocean close to Malindi, close to Mombasa City. And the third was to enhance public awareness on marine litter pollution, because we noticed that people are not even aware that marine litter is an issue. So we've done a lot of things. We've done surveys in streets, in beaches, in riverine areas. We've quantified the floating litter. We've quantified the benthic that are at the bottom of the sea. And lastly, we've also looked at microplastics. And the other surveys, we looked at both macroplastic and mesoplastics. So just to take you through on how things are in Kenya, in terms of the beaches, when looking at macro litter, we can report that through our standings of surveys, we get up to 5 items per meter squared. That is a large quantity. And the quantity also relies on how far the beach is situated from populated areas, so from urban areas. And we can report that just like other studies, 58% were plastics and 15% foam is of a particular interest because they are more toxic. And we can also confirm that 11% of the litter that we encounter along the Kenyan coast are rubber. 91% of all the brandable items were food products. That is good news, because if we can control this from the eating part of our lifestyle, then we are able to reduce litter by 91%. Then again, another interesting finding is that 88% of the litter that we encounter along the Kenyan coast are of Kenyan origin. So a local solution can be able to reduce the amount of litter by 88%. When we look at the accumulation rates, so if I can clean the beach today and go back tomorrow at the same time, just in 24 hours, we were reporting that the amount of litter that was accumulating was between 3 to 24 items per meter of the beach. And again, this is dependent on the location of the beach, with the beaches located near populated areas having higher accumulation rates. Another good news is that 31% of all the litter that we encounter along our beaches are recyclable. So promoting investment in a circular economy in recycling is able to reduce 31% of the litter that we encounter along our beaches. Then we also look at mesolitter. Mesolitter is the second class after the macrolitter. And also we can report that we are encountering around up to 95% of items per meter squared. Again, this was dependent on the location of the beach, with the more litter being recorded in urban beaches. Then beaches that have backup vegetation, you see the grass, the kind of shrub that are at the back of the beach. These are the beaches that harbor more mesolitter compared to beaches with sea walls or beaches with the bark that is non-vegetated. Then we looked at, we did a riverine survey just to estimate how much comes from the river, and we chose River Sabaki because it originates from Nairobi. Nairobi is almost 500 kilometers away from the Indian Ocean. So it passes through some informal settlement, then it passes through industrial area, then through again farmland, then it charges to the Indian Ocean. And we can report that we estimated that 6.6 billion to 614 billion of litter is annually discharged into Indian Ocean from this river, depending on the discharge of the river. So during low flow, we get around 6.6. During high flow, we get as high as 614 million of litter items discharged annually. As expected, 91% of these are soft plastics, and, because they have ability to be transported over a longer distance compared to the other classes of plastics. Then we also looked at the estuarine environment. In the estuarine environment, we mean the floodplains. So in the floodplains, we can report that around 91% of the litter we find buried in the floodplains are plastics. 70% are of Kenyan origin. And again, it is most interesting what happens in the floodplains, that when it rains, this litter that is buried is remobilized, but it's usually deposited during floods. But when it rains, it is mobilized by either wind or additional rain. And when they're immobilized, they're quickly swept by the currents, and they become available in the ocean. Then we could confirm that River Sabaki is indeed a conduit of litter to the ocean. And looking at the floodplain, we could report a daily accumulation rate of 7 items per meter of the beach. Then we also look at the buried litter. We had mentioned that floods will always bury litter. So we did some excavation to 1 meter and the characterized litter that we get after every 25 centimeters. And we can report that most of the litter were found between 0 to 50 centimeters depth, indicating that these are recently brought by floods. The other interesting part that we did was to estimate the amount of litter that is floating in our Kenyan waters. And we could report that 26,000, slightly over 26,000 items are floating per kilometer squared. And when we, assuming a homogeneous distribution, then we can extrapolate and say that we have around 3.7 billion meso and macro litter that are floating the EEZ. That excludes the estimate for macro litter. And most of the litter that we encountered floating were mostly dominated by hard plastic, soft plastic, and plastic fiber, including the nets and the fishing net fragments. Then higher densities were reported during the southeast monsoon, which is usually characterized by strong currents that can remobilize the litter that's at the bottom of the sea. Is also characterized by high rains, high volumes of rain that can bring more litter from the land. We did also a quick survey of the bottom of the sea, and very interesting findings. The lower picture, that's a coral, and we could find a food wrapper down there, had indicated that we found a car tire also in one of the areas. But our summary of our findings is that food product packaging were the most dominant categories. Then 81% of all the litter that we got are, of course, plastics. Then the benthic litter composition varied with beach activity. Beaches that were predominantly fishing beaches had higher quantities of fishing net fragments, while the ones that were very close to touristic beaches, mostly having higher vegetation, were mostly dominated by food packaging products. We also looked at mangroves, and we looked at mangroves because they play a very important role of cushioning or stopping all this litter before they get into the marine ecosystem. And the picture to the right can show you how bad the situation can be. And we did this in a number of counties, and we can confirm that indeed mangroves is playing a very important role in preventing this litter from getting to the ocean. What needs to be done is to assess the impact that they could be having in mangroves. We did also some microplastic surveys, and we can confirm that in the creeks, they were dominated by small size microplastics to a tune of 2898 microplastic per meter cubed. We collected also some organisms from these coastal creeks, and we can confirm that in oysters, we are finding up to 5.7 microplastic per gram of wet tissue. Same to crabs that we also encountered some microplastics in the tissue. The most interesting survey that we also did was to quantify microliter in our offshore area. So outside the territorial waters, basically in the EEZ. And in the EEZ, we can report that 75% of microplastics that we encountered were filaments. And when we looked at the ingestion by zooplankton, again, this related very well. So zooplankton were basically having preference for filaments by taking approximately 97% of the filaments. So another interesting finding that we can report again is that the quantities of microplastics were increasing as you go offshore. So close to the coastal areas, we had 100, and this increased to beyond 400, not really 400. It started around 50, close to the coastal areas, and this increased to around 200 particles per meter cubed. And again, this we could attribute to A, B, and J, if you're aware of it, areas beyond national jurisdiction. So our hypothesis is that if you look at the connectivity of systems, then water that is in the Asian continent will only require around 4 to 5 months to move from Asian continent to African continent. So basically, this could be the source of the microplastics that we are actually encountering in our exclusive economic zones. COVID is with us, so we have also done surveys to find the contribution of COVID to marine litter pollution, and we have some very interesting data. In the beginning, we could find more on the streets, very less on the beaches. Then we found none floating, but at the moment the picture has already changed. We find quite a number along our beaches. Then let me move away from research, but related to research, we've identified that for us to deal with the problem, then we first of all need to know how big the problem is. And that is why we've invested a lot of efforts in doing research. But we also acknowledge that it cannot only be done by my institution. So the data that the more the data that you can get, the better it will improve our understanding of the problem. So we've been doing a lot of capacity building in terms of how to assess marine litter pollution, how to collect the data. So we've been very active on this. We have a training course that will be running in November that we are going to carry out for West Indian Ocean countries. It just closed the other day, but of course, we are open to participation from the other countries to join. So apart from capacity building, we've been engaged in a lot of awareness campaign. The one to the left, the picture, you are aware of, it was called Floppy Expedition that was organized by UNEP and other stakeholders just to raise awareness, and sailed from Lamu in Kenya to Zanzibar in Tanzania. The boat was later carried to another big lake in Kenya for awareness campaign. Apart from that, we do a lot of cleanups just to raise awareness on plastic pollution menace. We have also a number of publications that we've done on the work that we've done. Then apart from that, we know that all countries have obligation to report for SDGs. We've been reporting on floating litter, particularly. We also do reporting for coastal eutrophication, but for this particular seminar, I think floating litter is of more interest. So what is it that we are doing as a country? Kenya was one of the first countries to put bans on a number of plastic items. The first ban was in 2017, where we put a ban on manufacture, sale, and the use of plastic carrier bags and flat bags. And this ban was very effective. It is still very effective. It's still being enforced at the moment. The carrier bags that we used to see prior to this ban littering everywhere along the streets and along the Kenyan coast have reduced substantively. The only part where we still find these bags are in the estuary that we surveyed, but this is because that there's a possibility that they were buried somewhere due to floods, but they are slowly being remobilized. The second ban was put in 2019, and this ban was on use of single-use plastic within protected areas, including beaches. I know we are having challenges with the enforcement. The first ban was very easy because the manufacturers and the people who are importing are very few and are very easy to control. But with regards to use, if you don't ban the manufacturer, then enforcement becomes a problem because you have millions. Kenyans now, we are around 50 million, and the law enforcement officers are quite few to enforce this. Then apart from these bans that the government has put, we are seeing slowly the coastal counties coming up with specific legislative instruments to control solid, to improve on solid waste management by so doing reducing the amount of waste that is leaking into the environment. Then I also want to report that we recently started working on our extended producer responsibility regulations that is doing really quite fine. We expect this to be finalized by the end of this year. And this responsibility requires every producer to have responsibility to commit to reduce pollution and environmental impacts of their products that they introduce into the market. Then we've recently come up with a producer responsibility organization that will execute this ERP, extended producer responsibility regulations on behalf of its members. And we can, I can report that we are doing quite well. We've made some great progress, and we expect this to be done by end of the year. Then lastly, in terms of what the government is doing, we are among the first countries again in Africa to come up with a specific action plan that is targeting marine litter pollution. This was finalized in July. It is due for launch, and we expect this to be launched in the next 1 or 2 months. And this action plan has a number of thematic areas, and proposes a number of actions on how to prevent and reduce litter from land-based sources, from sea-based sources. It also proposes actions to deal with, to handle the issues of prevention and reduction of transboundary waste. Then it has a number of activities to support implementation of the plan, including capacity building, awareness creation, research, and all that. Then we've noticed that there are a number of communities that have been working towards collecting this waste that we find along the Kenyan coast. But again, if there's no, if we don't encourage them to do it, then it becomes an issue because they have some other issues that they do to provide for their daily livelihood. So we have a number of projects that we are carrying out. WWF Kenya is working on a project that is actually making the waste to be a resource. So when you have your PET bottle, instead of throwing it, then we can take it back from you at a fee. So WWF is spearheading that, and as Chemfree, we are supporting that process by we've developed an app that basically is meant to improve connectivity between the buyers, the collectors of the waste, and the recyclers. So it becomes a very transparent system that recyclers know where the waste is and at what quantities. The collectors and the buyers know where the recyclers are when they're coming to collect the waste, and most importantly, the amount that they are offering. We believe that through this app and the increased visibility will enable the various actors to try to offer better prices and to be very competitive. And through that, we hope that we can promote circular economy in Kenya. And that is all that I wanted to present on the progress that we're making in Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That was a really great overview of everything happening in Kenya and with the work that you have done a lot in the last few years. I know you said you only started doing this in the last 5 years, but you really have done a lot. I'll open up the floor to questions from the audience and to the panel members. If there's anyone that has any questions, just use the Q&A box for your questions. And Fedora, you have your hand up, so you're welcome to ask a question in the meantime.
Thank you very much, Holly. I want to thank our guest, Dr. Eric Okuku, for a wonderful presentation. Sincerely, I'm hearing some of these things from Kenya for the first time. Most of the reports that I've read is from South Africa. And I know that South Africa has a very great template as a present on marine litter pollution. And now, interestingly, I just concluded a study that is about to go under review for marine litter pollution along the Gulf of Guinea coast here in Nigeria. And I'm thinking, I don't know yet, but I'm sure that may be the first report coming from Nigeria on marine litter pollution. I know we have not been doing much in that area, but I want to find out, based on the result that were presented, that which methodology were adopted during this study. I know that the most common one is the NOAA template in trying to assess different marine litter pollution. Then I know that last year, African Marine Waste Network came up with the first manual for Africa to assess marine litter along the African coast. I don't know whether you are aware of the document. It's the first one ever in Africa. And actually, I used that manual in the present study that I just talked about. So I don't know whether you're aware about it or you use different method, you know, in carrying out your study. And the reason why I'm curious about this is that most of the studies that have been done elsewhere in the world have around about 65% to about 78% of plastics being the percentage that is higher in marine litter pollution. But I'm seeing one of your results that you have about 90-something%. And I'm just wondering, is it the same method? Then if it's the same method, I think it's something that we need to worry about. And in order to also encourage comparison of results, in order to be able to, you know, compare results across at least African continents, I think it's also good that we can adopt the same methodology in the assessment of marine litter pollution. Thank you.
Oli, can I answer that or wait for more?
No, you can answer that in the meantime.
Oh, thank you, Fadare, for the question. I want to confirm that we use the African Marine Waste Manual, actually developed by SST South Africa. And actually, this manual was developed by funding from WIOMSA, Western Indian Ocean. It's an association that does funding in West Indian Ocean region. It was developed with a framework of the projects that we were carrying out. There were around 7 projects that were funded. And one of the projects was actually to develop the manual. So the manual that we used is the African one that initially it was for West Indian Ocean region alone. But at the moment, I've seen that SST has expanded the scope to cover the whole of Africa. So I want to confirm that indeed we used the manual that you also used for your surveys.
Thank you. That's good to know. Yeah.
We're still waiting for questions, but in the meantime, I did want to ask a question myself, because you spoke quite a lot about this idea of trapping and immobilization and remobilization of litter. And I think it's a really interesting and important research topic that needs to be considered when we're interpreting monitoring of litter in the marine environments. A lot of countries are going towards having to monitor marine litter to see if their actions and their action plans and their interventions are decreasing the litter that's getting discharged into the marine environment. But as you mentioned, if we don't figure out where this litter is being trapped, whether it's in the mangroves or the floodplains, and how they get remobilized, it may be skewing our data, and we would see decreases in the marine environment, but actually we're going to have legacy problems for years to come because it's being trapped in the mangroves. I don't know if you have anything else to comment on that, especially with the work that you've been doing in mangroves, which is so limited in globally at the moment.
Yes, indeed, Holly, I want to confirm that the work on there's need to look at, especially the flooding areas. There's need to look at the possibility of remobilization of what is already buried. I'll give an example of the river that we surveyed. So a general assumption will be that data comes from the river. So if it is a dry season, I'll be stuck at the river with my net, quantifying the quantities that are coming in. Yes, that is good. But again, we discovered during our 10-day survey that we did, actually a 12-day survey that we did, that even at times, not only the input from the river, it was quite windy. And when it is windy, it blows away the sand. And when it blows away the sand, anything that was buried before becomes mobilized. And this was easily swept into either the river back, and the river, of course, joins the ocean or to the ocean. So especially if you have high depositional areas, then it will be good to look at the burial, especially for mangrove. Mangroves are a low energy area, so we expect a lot of sedimentation. So you might think that you clean the surface, thinking that you've gotten rid of the litter, but I can tell you, during southeast monsoon, when the currents are a little bit strong, all this litter will come back to the ocean.
Thank you very much. Do any of the attendees want to, you're welcome to raise your hand and then join the panel to ask any questions. You can also ask a question in the Q&A. And this is your opportunity to ask and learn more about what's happening in Kenya. I did want to just ask about this training course that's happening in November. Just because I think it would be something that a lot of the network would be interested in finding out more about. Is it, it's obviously going to be online, but is it open to, is there still applications that are allowed to go in for people who want to attend the course, or how does the course work? Oh wait, sorry, you're muted.
The training course is funded by WIOMSA, West Indian Ocean Marine Science Association. So the scope is basically, for the funding, is the West Indian Ocean countries. So Kenya, Tanzania, Mauritius, Madagascar, South Africa, Seychelles. Yes, those are the countries that we are targeting. But those are the countries that are targeting that can get funding. But the other countries that are planning or have that are planning to attend, of course, you can send us your application. You can drop our email so that you make an application and you can join us. At the moment, there's a bit of the COVID situation is improving, so we are still going with option A, which will be physical meeting, because apart from the theoretical part, we've planned a lot of practical sessions. How to assess mangrove, later quantities in mangroves, how to do it in rivers, how to do it in floodplains, how to do quantify the floating ones, how to do the benthic ones. All those are planned as a practical process. So at the moment, we are going to go for option A, which is physical meeting. But of course, if the situation worsens in the next 1 or 2 months, then we'll have an option of a theoretical part with an online virtual meeting with pre-recorded practical sessions.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I will email you afterwards just to get a few of the details, and then I can share it, because we do have quite a lot of members that are from the WIOMSA area. So hopefully someone will find that useful, and also the action plan that you have that's coming out in the next few months, I think will be very beneficial, because as you said, I mean, SST did do one a while ago, but it was more on a generic overall for the African continent, rather than having a specific action plan for the country, which I think are useful for each country to have. So I don't know if there's any other questions from the panelists or from the attendees. I'll just give you a few more moments.
Ollie.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I just want to appeal to Dr. Eric that I think it's also important that the Northern Atlantic, the countries, African countries along the North Atlantic Ocean are also carried along, because both sides, I think they meet down South Africa, right? So there is no way we are going to talk about Indian Ocean, and we are not going to be talking about North Atlantic Ocean as far as Africa is concerned. I think Africa lies between those two oceans. So, and I believe that the impact in each of these sides will definitely affect all countries in Africa. So I will still appeal that most countries that are lying along the Northern Atlantic Oceans are also carried along in your plan, so that we can all grow together. Because what we are trying to do is to harmonize data that are coming out from Africa. And there's no way you are going to talk about microplastics or nanoplastics that you are not going to talk about marine litters. And of course, the marine litters that also break down, into micro and nanoplastics. So I will appeal once again that for our network, it would be good if you can work together and be able to carry out along other countries, even countries that are land logged. They still also generate waste, which come through their rivers and different outlets into the oceans. So it's good that everyone is carried along. Thank you very much.
Yes, I agree. I had indicated that only 88% of the litter that we encounter in the Kenyan beaches are of local origin, meaning 12%, which is also a huge percentage, they come from neighboring countries. That will be good to move together. And as I had indicated before, we got funding from the YOMSA. It has a limited scope, so it's only for West Indian Ocean countries. But we are open. If anybody from Africa has a funding, or from any part of the world has a funding and wants to join our physical training, you are welcome. But in case that you might not be able to get funding to attend the physical training, then we'll work at the possibility of doing a dual of virtual and physical training, so that the other countries that are not able to get funding are able to join us virtually.
Thank you so much. We don't have any questions, so I just wanted to ask one more question and then we will close. You mentioned something in your talk that it resonated, because I've recently read this paper about the modeling of litter that's coming out of countries in Southeast Asia and things like that, and how that can impact small island states and African countries. And one of the things was that, we really do have to factor in that a lot of the, that was the one you were talking about. A lot of that litter can actually reach the African continent and be in our waters and things like that. So I think that paper recently came out this year, actually, and that modeled how much plastic could actually end up on the African continent from Southeast Asia. So I don't know, if you wanted to mention anything more about that.
Yeah, as my brother had indicated, marine pollution knows no boundary. And this is why we need to work together on this, because we noticed that from this study, it is very clear that actually we'll be struggling with the microplastics that are not really Kenyan origin or from African origin. They're actually from Asia, from the data that we have. So I know there are measures being put in place with regards to A, B, and J especially pollution that are originating from areas beyond national jurisdiction. And again, this point to the fact that governments should work together in controlling these things, because if you don't engage your neighbor, you'll still be taking fish that has microplastic from their areas.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this. And thank you for joining. Thank you for the attendees for joining another one of our network webinars. And it was great to hear what Kenya is doing. And we look forward to getting all those documents out and sharing them with our network when they come through, and hopefully working together more in the future. It was really nice meeting you, not in person, but virtually. And hopefully we will meet in person in the next few years.
Thank you for hosting me.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.